All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I am the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. I am here with my friend A.E. Osworth, who has written the amazing, fun, and funny book, Awakened. It is hot off the presses just about 2 weeks ago now. Is that right? Week and a half? Yeah, give or take. And we are really excited to get to talk about everything that's in this book. Awakened is a magical coming of age romp about love, loss, drag shows, and late capitalism. It is a perfect book for our Charis readers. I knew it would be. I met A.E. Osworth as their student, and so it's really cool for me as a writer to get to talk to one of my writing mentors about how they put this book together. But it is also really exciting for me to get to talk to a trans author that is writing explicitly to trans readers. And so part of what we're going to talk about tonight is why and how one makes a book for their people, and what does it mean to do that. So I have asked AE to start us off just by reading a little bit. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, ER. I'm really stoked. I love Charis, and this was one of the first places that I thought of when I thought of where I wanted to launch my book. Um, so yeah, I'm just going to read the very beginning of Awakened because I think that readings online and on video are a little strange. So I'm going to keep it pretty short and just read a very self-contained prologue. You don't need to know anything because it's the very first thing that you're going to encounter in Awakened. Pay attention. Something amazing is about to happen. It is a chilly Maine morning, which, when the morning is in Maine, might be a large variety of mornings, given that many mornings in Maine could be considered chilly. Perhaps it is early spring, or maybe fall is blooming red on the mountain. Heck, it could even be a winter morning, warm compared to all the other mornings huddled in around it. Regardless, it is Maine, and the house is set very far from the road. The driveway wends through a wood for perhaps half a mile before the house, the exterior a happy yellow in the process of being repainted a ladybird brown, peeks out from behind the trees. Eventually, sometime in the future, though who knows exactly when, this shy house will smile from behind its mother's skirts to greet a packed car inching its way up the driveway. But that is not the amazing thing about to happen. Presently, no such car exists. The house says hello to no one. The sun itself is just cresting the tops of the trees, the only witness and still sleepy. It is early, even for a morning. The yard is strewn with ladders and buckets and tarps, which makes sense given the apparent renovation. Next to the fuse box, just inside the garage, stands a woman whose wild hair curls from under a knit beanie, static shock in the crisp air. She is blessed with a prominent nose, no delicacy here, and a neck that's dancing grace, all delicacy here, which is, at present, wrapped within a scarf. She closes her eyes and inhales deeply. Wood smoke on the air. The wind gives her goosebumps. She holds a drill, squeezes the trigger to test the battery, the electric whir cutting into the sound of the woods waking up. Okay, she says, as though she is gearing up to do something difficult. Okay. She opens the fuse box and shuts off the master switch, the red lever at the very top. She can hear the crackle as the power leaves the lines along her roof. Everything is still for a moment as she stares up, listening, making sure she can't hear any more power. Only birdsong. Now, one might expect her to operate the drill on some part of the house given all the contextual clues. But her face changes. Tentative to hard. She puts the drill down and walks through the interior garage door, stopping at a workbench along the way to interface with a coffee can full of batteries, some of them old and crusty, and some of them brand new, shining like jewels from unuse. She hauls the vessel onto her hip as she enters the house, conspicuously door alarmless. Her gaze flicks to every battery-supported piece of technology as she checks things off the list in her mind. She can't think of anything else. She's gotten it all. She lets out a breath she doesn't realize she's been holding, deflating with relief only for a second before squaring her shoulders and facing the rest of her house. She tears it apart. She begins a honey badger search for any device that one might consider smart. She rips a thermostat off the wall, hauls a television outside, adds her laptop and phone to the careful pile, lovingly crafted, of expensive technology, and split firewood. When it becomes apparent she needs more fuel, she grabs a dining room chair from her set of 6 and breaks the legs off it with her bare hands, popping each rung from between the top rail and the bottom with a delicious snap, a smile creeping across her face. Relief, as though cracking her knuckles. When the pile is complete, her house stripped bare of anything that can connect to the internet, she pours herself the peatiest scotch she has. She grabs a respirator and a can of gasoline and tucks a box of long hearth matches under her arm. Wood smoke. Wood smoke on the air. A portent. And after she drenches the pile, each motherboard and solid-state drive and display cable soaked well beyond recoverable function and smelling noxious, after looking once more to the fresh morning sky and giving a toast to the errant cloud above, after taking a decadent sip of expensive alcohol and fastening her respirator securely over her nose and mouth, she calmly and deliberately sets it all on fire. Thank you. That's the opening for Awakened.
Thank you. I love that opening. I love how it invites us into this omniscient storybook world. I want to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about that omniscient voice, but first, I want to talk about the dedication. Will you read us the dedication?
I can absolutely read you the dedication. And this would have been more explicit if I thought I could get away with it. For everyone who feels betrayed by J.K. Rowling. Now, I don't mean explicit as in like clear. I mean explicit as in like a middle finger. That I thought I'd been able to get away with casting out a cast.
Um, I felt so welcomed by that dedication, and I think it's such a beautiful and expansive dedication, to all of us, and it makes it really clear who this book is for. So, because I've been your student, I know that you are somebody who thinks a lot about how we signal who a book is for, particularly if you are a marginalized writer. Um, so, can you talk a little bit about your choices around, sort of those signals? How do you decide, hey, come here, I'm talking to you?
Well, so there's some of this that's me, and then there's some of it that sort of fortunately my publishers really understood as well. So, for example, this cover, like, this was a first go. They knocked it out of the park. And that's because like my editor is queer and like she put together a team of people who really understand how to reflect this. So like from as an object, like this signals, we've got our witch stuff on the front here. The joke that my friend Nat says is I always break a phone in every book that I write. I love technology so much, and it also makes me so anxious, which I think is like a pretty common sort of dual feeling to hold. And so from the book as an object, also if you look at the back, nearly every one of these folks is queer. Um, and many of them are trans. So if you are picking this up and you're like, oh, Dan Michelle Norris, like that is another trans author. Okay, my team understood that. That's their lookout. When it comes to what's in the book, J.K. Rowling doesn't get to own magic, and I feel like I'm not the only trans person who grew up with Harry Potter really loving it and really feeling quite betrayed as she sort of moves into her new role as, torturing trans people via making policy internationally. Um, when you look at it and when you look at it critically, there are some things in Harry Potter that have always been there that are super problematic, but I wasn't thinking critically at 11. I was thinking magically at 11. So how I then took that and signaled who this book was for was I made opposite choices to a lot of what J.K. Rowling was doing. So, for example, Harry Potter is at its core a school story, and that's like quite a popular British genre, particularly about boarding schools. And so it has a lot of tropes that it's following there. There is no school in this, and all of my characters are adults. Um, and so it's a very different feel. Like my youngest character is 17, but she's there and she's quite mature, and she's largely there for figuring out parenting. There's a parenting plot line with her and chosen family and what that means when there's a kid involved, and what you need to do and provide for a kid. And that's my youngest character in the book, is a 17-year-old who rules and does a lot of crime. So that's one way I made an opposite choice. The characters talk a lot about like how this kind of magic, there's no way to learn it. It's like adulthood. Things sort of happen and you have to figure them out as they happen. Another opposing choice is that every character in this book is trans. I do not have a single cis character in the book. Um, and so talk about signaling to who the center of my audience is. Like this is a book about trans people and other people can read it. I think it's a really good book. I'm really proud of it. And I think I scaffold out for people who aren't trans and for people who even aren't queer, for people who are, you know, also frustrated with science fiction and fantasy at large, and also frustrated with J.K. Rowling, who holds a variety of identities, and also just for people who like science fiction and fantasy. But at the center of my audience, I made the characters reflect my community, who I am writing to.
Yeah, I was like, it took me a little while to be like, oh, everyone in this book is trans. Like, even the like secondary, tertiary characters are trans, um, in one way or another, and the beautiful, diversity of the transness that is depicted in this book. Um, One of the things that we were just talking about in the green room is like, there was this moment where there was sort of a commodification and expansion of trans stories that benefited some trans writers. Like in the same way that like there was this moment in publishing that was like, oh, after 2020 and Black Lives Matter, like, oh, we're gonna like sign all these Black authors, right? And now what we're seeing is a likely dropping of those priorities because of
And
capitalism.
yeah, I'm quite worried about it because the thing is, we're having like a golden year for trans fiction. It is wild out here. Dan Michelle, Heron Walker, Charlie Jean Anders, everybody is publishing this year. It's everybody. Just trans books coming out the ground, growing on trees. But these books weren't purchased this year. Publishers purchased them at a very different time. Like this took 2 years to really come to fruition from its purchase to now, and I'm just really worried. I'm really worried because it's really popular right now to hate trans people. And anything that sort of chases, the capitalistic dream of money making hinges on what is popular. That said, I just talked about the publishing team who got this just so well. They understood what this was. And so as much as I'm dreading what the next couple of years are going to look like for my community trans authors, I'm also quite hopeful that individuals within these institutions that are there not to make money, because no one really gets rich making books, that are there because they love books and they want to make good books. I'm hopeful that the individuals will take us through this. Um, and that's sort of what I'm hanging my hat on in terms of hope. And then I'm also hanging my hat on smaller presses, international. I think, given a lot of the uneasy landscape in the US, I think we might see a turn toward fiction from other places, that is not quite so hindered, as fiction in the US is probably going to be.
Yeah.
So light a candle, everybody.
Time to say our witchy prayers and spells. um,
Got a candle right here. Light a candle.
Totally. So I want to talk a little bit about the plot. And you know, this is a fantasy book. It is a pure, like, to me, really in fantasy tropes is the team has to assemble, right? And that's whether it's like the Avengers or in D&D, right? Like,
The party together. Yep.
yeah, you got to get your party together. And so we have an entry point character named Wilder,
Mhm.
who wakes up one day and they kind of stumble around. You know, they're like a stereotypical, like, early 30s Brooklynite, like, disaffected, grumpy, and they suddenly realize that they can understand all of the many languages in New York City, right? And what a great
Understand and speak.
and
Which,
speak, yes, which is a great scene. And if you've ever thought that would be a cool power, that scene quickly dissuades you from that feeling, because it's obviously really overwhelming for them. But
mhm.
they are the one that must find their troop, right? Their party. And so this is sort of the, like, you know, like the call to action, I guess.
And they
Um,
do not make it easy for to find their troop or their party. They do not. They fundamentally are afraid of deep lasting connections and friends. So they make it really difficult.
Yeah, so like if Luke Skywalker was kind of a dick when he got the call to action, like Wilder is like difficult. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, like, what did you want to, like, play with, subvert around these fantasy tropes, especially with regard to, like, the troop or the party.
So I wanted to, like, this is going to sound wild, but I wanted to apply realism here. When it comes to like high fantasy. This isn't high fantasy, but like something that is very fantastical. People have magic that manifests in this very fantastical way. Um, and to me, like people accept that very quickly. And that does not seem like what it would be. And like powers that sound awesome are rarely just awesome. I see a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and I'm using, by the way, intentionally both genres because even though this is like pretty heavily fantasy, I also have a massive science fiction element sort of woven through it as well. And I really intentionally did both instead of one because fuck a binary. But people accept it really fast in fantasy things. People sometimes don't question the sort of like positive versus negative of having their powers. I think X-Men does it really well, actually, where some people really struggle. In this case, the basically what I was thinking when I was doing this is I was like, what if I actually woke up and could speak and understand every single language? Sensorially, bodily, viscerally, what would that actually feel like? What is the real feeling that that would cause in me? And the answer was like total sensory overwhelm because all of a sudden my mouth is making shapes I don't know how to make. And like I can hear things sort of melting together and breaking apart that I could not hear before. And all of a sudden, everything in the world other than complete silence is an assault. And
Yeah.
especially, I particularly picked Queens for Wilder to live in because it is the most linguistically diverse borough in New York City and one of the most linguistically diverse places in the world. And so there is no escape. They live in this melting pot of language where rare languages are spoken. And so it would not just like, a lot of people speak Spanish. No, there are people who speak all sorts of things in Queens, and there are people from countries where we just don't commonly hear those languages in the US. And they're all there. Everybody's there in Queens. So I particularly picked that as an added realism. Like this happens in Queens, this linguistic melting pot, and it would be heinous. It would be heinous to wake up with this power in that place. The troop as well, like queer adults, any adults have, decades worth of bad habits and traumas and big personalities and other relationships and all of these things that are impacting them. And so as much as I love like a good D&D party where everyone's chummy and everyone is there to participate in the group, um if I apply realism to that, when I think about like all of the like it's so difficult to be a person, and so how difficult would it be to like strike up a merry band? um Extremely difficult. Like everyone has different access needs and everyone's got trauma that's informing them in different ways, and like bad behavior, very bad behavior in some cases. And so just applying realism to some of those tropes has changed them. Um, and I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I love that. I think the one of the things that I felt like you were appreciated is the sort of queer way of doing conflict and repair. Like people get angry or hurt or sullen and they are scared and they freak out or they repress it and run
Mm-hmm.
away. Um, and there's this like attempt at clarification or repair or at least like trying to listen to one another. Why was it important for you to include that kind of modeling for people in this book?
So I don't know that I was thinking about it as modeling. I was thinking about it as reflecting my community. Um, and my community, you know, like we're all human and we're all so messy. Um, but I have a fundamental belief, and partly because I have surrounded myself with some of the best people in the world, in my opinion, that everyone is trying their best. Um, and so it was not necessarily as modeling for my community. It was reflective of the kind of just like clawing toward doing the best that I see in my community. And that was really hard to write sometimes. It's a big spoiler, so I'm not going to give you details, but there is a particular scene that I was throwing my voice really far. So there are two characters that are not like me at all, and they are dealing with something that I have never dealt with and will never deal with. Um, and the other part of that as a writer, when I'm sitting here going, I'm reflecting my community, is I'm often throwing my voice. And my community is not just a whole bunch of, pregnant, non-binary trans people. Like it's not just me over and over and over again. Um, it's really, really diverse. And so as I'm trying to reflect that, I'm dealing in things that are not personal experiences that I'm imagining into. And this is a conflict moment. It's a conflict scene. It's toward the end of the book. I'm sure ER or anyone else who has read it knows which scene I am talking about. It's a very, very emotionally charged, between two characters who are trans women. And, you know, it was important for me as a writer to do this too, and not as a model for other people, but to sit down with like what is a commonly accepted narrative of the way that this conflict should play out, and then how do I not do any of those patterns at all, um and how do I break some of those things down. And it took me months to write that one scene took me months to write. And when I sat down and looked at it, I was like, oh, this is what happens when my community, full of vibrant, amazing, messy as hell people, try their fucking best and just like disallow the idea that anyone is disposable. This is what happens. So that's where the conflict stuff came up. I'm also a very direct person when it comes to conflict, and a very direct apologizer when it comes to conflict. So I think that shows up as well because that's who I am. But yeah, no, I was really trying to not model but reflect.
Yeah, I mean, I think about all of the books whose plot hinges on like straight people like lying to each other. You know, like if
That in here, that's
yeah,
like
no,
it drives me insane when I'm watching a thing or reading a thing and I'm like, what would solve this problem? Everybody talks. Like that is to me like not a successful plot.
yeah, it's wild how often it happens, and I think it happens because straight people they're don't always talk to each other in romantic relationships. Like, I just watched Baby Girl last night, and that whole plot is like her not telling her husband her desires, and then like having an extramarital affair, and then finally like being able to tell her husband how she wants to have sex. Good job. But like queer people, obviously we're not a monolith, and we're not magic in that way. Your characters are, but like that. So much of this book is about communication, and magical communication, technological communication, and then also literal, like, hey, we are human beings trying to do this thing, and you are getting on my nerves, or you're acting like a real weenie right now, and I need you to buck up, or like there is this old wound between our people and like we have stepped on this wound.
Mhm.
I It is frankly so popular right now is that like our world is also maybe ending like our world right now feels like it's ending. And so we're getting
I'm so
so.
sorry, ER. You cut out for a little for me. Could you repeat what you just said? Because I feel like I missed something important.
Yeah, no, sure. So our the I think people are learning from science fiction and fantasy right now how to navigate the end of the world. And basically like we ain't got time to fight. Like we need to deal with our conflict effectively. Because if we don't, like, life's too short, basically. Life's
Mhm.
too short to deny ourselves pleasure, and life's too short to have petty disagreements, right? So like how do we move through that? And I see that a lot in the characters in this book.
Well, thank you, because
uh,
that's a massive compliment. You know, as much as this is a fantasy book and a science fiction book, I also wanted it to be like psychologically realistic, and the sort of deeply reflective of the way people exist.
yeah, I think it succeeds, for sure. Could you talk a little bit about the larger coven and how did they arrive to you? Like, did this group of people arrive sort of simultaneously to you, or did they sort of arrive one by one?
So, often when I'm writing, I hear the voice first, before I know what anybody looks like. The very first thing that I heard that made it into this version of the book, because there are two previous versions that got tossed entirely, 20,000 words a piece gone. So 40,000 words, no. But the very first thing that I heard in my head, that made it into this book is when Quibble is one of the witches. We've got four people in the coven. Wilder, who we talked about, who wakes up one day, with the ability to speak and understand all the languages. Quibble is a person who can travel great distances, but sort of rips time and space open to do so. It's not quite teleportation, but it's something adjacent. Artemis can see magic, which not everybody can. People are generally like doing it by feel, and she can see it all. And then Mary Margaret, our teenager who does crime, has this sort of extra dimensional pocket that she can reach in and out of, which means she can pickpocket the shit out of anybody. Um, those are our four coven members. I'm pregnant, by the way, and I've got so much baby brain. Can you remind
How
me
did
what the is again?
did they sort of arrive to you simultaneously?
No. First thing that I heard in this book is when Quibble explains, that magic isn't something that you can learn at school. And that was the very first thing I heard. Quibble's body changed a bunch of times after that. I tried a bunch of different characters on, that voice, and none of them fit. And that was part of the 20,000 words out, in one of the drafts where I was like, this person shouldn't be saying these things. So what I did to really, and then I knew Artemis was there. Her present form arrived pretty fully formed. Um, but to concretize everybody, what I did was when I was like, okay, I've done 40,000 words. They're useless. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do a new draft. I did tarot spreads for everybody. And so that is how I generated a lot of the characters in this instance. So I was like, okay, I know that there are these four people. I'm now going to do a 10 card spread that's going to give me their arc for the book. And that is how I generated these characters. And then as I was writing, I was pulling single card pulls for each of the chapters as well. Because it's a book about witches and tarot features very, very heavily in it. Um, and so that is, yeah, that's how I did um everybody's arcs and everybody's bodies and figured them out that way.
That's awesome. So for folks who don't know, yeah, the chapters all have tarot card um, titles, basically. Um,
I think I only changed two of them. I and the rest are as I pulled them. One I remember changing because I split a chapter and I labeled one the tower because I was like, I feel like every book needs a tower.
yeah,
And for those of you who have never read tarot before, a tower is like everything changes suddenly, everything falls apart, something massive explodes. Like that's so I inserted a tower because I never pulled one, but other than that, it's pretty faithful to what I pulled.
that is fascinating. I just assumed you were absolutely fudging all of these cards. So
Nope, I was not.
that's amazing. So do you use? I assume that you use tarot in your day to day life, like as your own
Yes.
personal work.
Yeah, I can spot three decks right now. Around this living room. Like yes, I pull a card for myself every day. I have a lot of decks that I collect. I read for other people. In my grad program, whenever we went to hang out after our workshop at the bar, I would have a tarot deck that I would read for folks with at the bar. So I read at residencies. I read at my own book launch in Vancouver. Um, yeah, I love tarot. And the thing is, like, even if you are not a witchy person, like, I would say I'm like a medium witchy person, which is hilarious for someone who wrote a whole book about witches. But regardless of how you feel about magic and about tarot, what you have in a tarot deck is 78 archetypes, which means they are primed for story already. So they are there for you if you are stuck. And there are really clear symbols that you can use in your storytelling. There are really clear, sort of pre-packaged hero's journeys that can then impact your storytelling in really neat ways. Depending on the deck that you have, your imagery will change, and that's really cool. Um, and yeah, I think it's a valuable tool regardless of how you feel about magic,
Yeah.
for readers particularly.
Uh, side note: Charis sells many different kinds of decks. So if you need more representational decks that feel like you and not just like the Rider Waite, we got them covered, folks. So check it out. So did anybody? It sounds like maybe not, but did anyone's powers change from conception to?
Ooh, no, the powers stayed the same the whole way through. That never changed. People's bodies changed, people's voices changed, people's dynamics changed. Everyone who has magic, I knew from jump what each character had. So I don't know why. Like like what's hilarious is like some of these answers are not going to be satisfying. And I feel like that's true of every author. Is like some authors are gonna have like real clear process stuff and like real clear analysis. And having broken down what they've done, they can now teach other people to do it. And I have a lot of those things. This one, no fucking clue. I can't tell you how to replicate that. That just jumped into my head because I'm out here living my little daydream hallucinations and I get to write it down somehow to project my hallucinations into your head. And somehow this is my job and it's the best job in the world. And I don't know where they came from. I don't know where the magic came from.
Yeah, I mean that's great. I do think that is magic, and it like there's not it's not all something that you can explain. I don't think it should be. Um, One of the things, so folks may or may not know that this is your first book, which
I
is
love that
great.
book. Stone
Uh,
Cold Bummer, but I love that book.
it is a bummer. I went and read some Goodreads reviews, which I never do, uh, because
I
I
love Goodreads reviews on this one because people are like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, but that's the point.
yeah
Like, Uh,
People love to miss the point on books that are documenting the horror of reality, and I'm like, yep, like people are real bad out there. But this book has really innovative narration, where you have two sets of collective narrators, sort of these toxic, misogynistic Gamergate bros, and then a coven of tech savvy witches who combat them. And then in this novel, you play with a third person omniscient voice in a way that I can't really remember seeing done in recent times. And it was really exciting, and surprising. So, can you talk a little bit in a spoiler free way about how you got to the structuring of this novel?
so there it like narrative point of view is my baby. I love narrative point of view. And to me, like that is the most fascinating thing about any book because the narrator, whatever the narrator is what stands between the reader and the events of the plot. It is the lens through it is the only lens through which the reader can experience the events of the plot because without it this doesn't exist. And so even if you're choosing a default narrator, for example, J.K. Rowling's default narrator, this is an opposition choice that I was talking about. J.K. Rowling does a close third narration, largely on Harry, but not always. Sometimes we get Snape, and in one very memorable, in her first book, she breaks the narration entirely in a way that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, she follows Hermione for a second. Never happens again. Never happens again. To the point where rereading it after grad school, it is so blatantly obvious that I was like, holy shit, this is wild, and I don't know how an editor let it happen. Um, but anyhow, a close third narration people consider default, but it still says something about your book. And I don't ever want a default narration ever. So yeah, this book deals in omniscience. A lot of this book is about, um, you know, what can be foretold and what can't. As I just mentioned, I used a lot of tarot in it. And what is destiny or fate and what is not. Um, and where our free will or agency lives in a world where magic exists. And some of that magic is about future telling. Um, and yeah, so there, even in the section that I read, like we know that eventually there will be a car on that driveway. And that's not what's happening right now. And so that kind of thing happens a lot in the book where we see into the future or we head hop. I I think this is hilarious. Head hopping. I started hearing about it a couple of years ago, and I started hearing about it from students where they're like, "Well, so and so teacher says I can't head hop," and I'm like, "What the fuck does this mean?" And they're like, "Going from one character to the next character so that we can hear both their interiority." And I'm like, "That's just omniscience, and people have been doing it forever. Yes, you can do that. You can't do it badly. It has to be clear where we are, but like, no, that's just omniscience." So we get everybody's interiority in this book. We also get what they don't yet know about themselves, which was my favorite part to write. Like, I often have something like, Artemis wouldn't be able to put this into a sentence, but, or what Wilder is expressly not thinking about is, and an ultra omniscience allows for us to get that sort of underpinning. Some of that is just because, like, I have enough of the tism to need an explanation for the subtext. I am not always the best at reading the subtext. So some of that comes from me, but some of that comes from this sort of playing with, like, okay, if I'm not going to do a default narrator, still not default, it's never default, what do I then do to disrupt that? And this ultra omniscience is one of the choices that I made. There is also a really neat reveal about the narrator. It is there for a reason. It's not just an oppositional choice. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because that wouldn't be so fun for you. But I highly recommend that you read the narrator quite carefully.
Was
Um,
that chosen? Was the oppositional part chosen first, or was the special
ooh,
surprise chosen first?
the special surprise came first. I knew who that was.
That's great.
Um, so special surprise came first. But it I love writing in anger. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love making oppositional choices because it concretizes something that's murky. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm like, not that, opposite of that. And it's funny for someone who doesn't really truck in binaries. Um, because what's the opposite thing? Truth is, nothing has an opposite thing. Everything is sort of, wibbly and continuumy and, a larger play space than that. But it really gets you to flex. If you think about like, if we're thinking about like default narration of, close third, sort of like standing in a space. And if I stand on that space and then just take a ball and throw it as far as I can in a direction, where does that land? And all of a sudden, everything between me and the ball where it lands has become possible now. Oppositional choices are amazing for concretizing how you can do something, particularly if you haven't seen it recently or at all. And this particular narrator is something I haven't seen, so I don't have a playbook. And so an oppositional choice is perhaps the easiest way to get started.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So in your first novel, we spend a lot of time in digital space. And one of the arguments of that book is that what happens in digital space is deeply consequential for what happens in physical space. Like
Yeah,
there's like people often, not so much anymore. Like people don't really make the argument as much as they once did that like, oh
pandemic. It's
yeah,
because of the pandemic. Everybody had to live in digital space for 3 years, and now everyone believes me.
yeah,
That is why.
yeah. Now people are like, oh yeah, digital space matters. But before it really was only like gamers and big nerds who respected internet space. But in this novel, we spend a lot of time in magical space and in liminal sort of magical space, and some online space, but mostly magical space. And it similarly has grave repercussions for what happens on the physical plane. Did writing and thinking about the internet space in your first book prepare you to write about the ways characters navigated their embodiment? I'm using the word embodiment, but their selfhood in magical space.
I didn't think about it that way, but I think you might be right. You are such an astute reader. Thank you for reading this book that carefully. Yeah, I would say that the way that magic is cast in this book is that people have their body that lives here, and then they have a sort of adjacent spiritual body. I put the quotes because it sounds cheesy. And the experience that I'm hoping that I get across in this book is not cheesy. But they have, your regular hands and your regular eyes and your regular ears in meat space. And then they have an extension of those things in this sort of like interior magical space. And now I am sitting here going like, oh, my first book was heavily VR and was about creating the body, outside or otherwise of your own body. And this is about discovering a body that is outside or otherwise of your own body. And I would not have speaking of like, I would not have been able to put this into a sentence. Like, I would not have for $1,000,000 and given 1,000,000 years been able to tell you that one of those leads to the other. But you did. And that's why this job is the best job. Because like, I had this hallucination in my head for 5 years, and then I made 400 pages about it, and then projected that hallucination into your head, and then you connected it to the previous hallucination that I did that with in a way that I don't myself know, and then told me something about my own brain. This is the best job.
It is. Well, and getting to be a reader is the best job too.
Yeah.
I will point out that there are parallel sex scenes in both worlds as well.
I would not, again, for 1,000,000 years, have called those parallel.
I mean, they're affectively quite different, but
it's about embodiment and sex in both cases. In one case, we're having sex in VR, and it's really uncanny, and kind of weird and kind of creepy. And in the other, we're having an astral projection threesome. That is something you can look forward in this book. I have written an astral projection threesome. It's toward the end of the book. You're welcome.
Yeah, it's pretty great. So I want to I see we have some questions. I want to invite other folks to put their questions in. Really quickly, I want to talk about AI because this now is sort of a specialty of yours. AI does play a role in this book. Both of your books are heavily, aware of the internet. You've written nonfiction about the internet. Um, in some ways, like AI serves as this like cipher for a lot of the moral arguments the characters are having with each other and with themselves. Again, about like free will, what constitutes a human being, what makes something good or bad. At this moment in our lives, when it seems like the ship has sailed on a specific version of AI, but perhaps, I mean, I believe there's still time to make changes. Do you have any specific hopes about what reading a novel like yours might do for folks who are uncertain about the role they want AI to play in their lives?
So, an interesting thing about this is that I began this book and began the AI before generative LLMs really joined the public conversation. So the AI in this book is generated not with, a chat GPT or a Claude or a Gemini or any of those. It's generated with something called Botnik VoiceBox, which if we're thinking about chat GPT as a Ferrari, Botnik VoiceBox is a skateboard with one square wheel. It is broken. It is shitty. It is amazing. Because the what I wanted to do for this AI was induce failure. And that's not a concept that I can take credit for. That's actually a concept by Calvin Kasulki, who wrote Several People Are Typing, and had worked with Botnik before. And I got him on the phone and he taught me how to do it. Um, and that was I was at a writing residency in 2020, and it was the last normal thing I did before lockdown was make the hex is the villain's name. So I made the hex. The corpus that makes the hex up constitutes the following: Machiavelli, Arthurian legend, and the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Handbook, along with spam text messages to really induce failure and make it sound really broken. And he sounds creepy as hell. As a result, what's interesting is that that is still an AI. It is not what we now think of as AI, but AI is actually a really broad category that's anything that mirrors human-like qualities. And so autocomplete, which is essentially what this was, it was an autocomplete keyboard trained on these texts, is AI. Um, so that's the first thing. I hope that people understand that AI is not the one thing that we are now talking about, is actually quite a few things. The category is far broader, and we use it every day. Spell check is arguably an AI, and we've been using that forever. So when you think about it that way, we can actually take the alarm down a notch. That like this is not something that's going to just immediately come in and destroy our lives. That said, this feels pretty gnarly. And so, what argument am I actually making here? First off, artificial intelligence, as I've written it, does not exist. It is not an intelligence. Maybe someday we will have that, and in that case, it would cease to be artificial. It would simply be an intelligence. As it stands now, we have nothing like what is in the book. Um, but I do hope that people think about the corpus, and what we give to our AI, even if it's not really artificial intelligence, even if artificial intelligence doesn't exist. What are we producing that is then reflected back to us? Because AI is really just a giant mirror. And when you see some of the things that this AI thinks is okay to do, based on where it got its information in the context of the story, that is what I hope people think about, is like, what are we giving to AI that is being then bounced back to us?
Yeah. And we're already
And
seeing.
I say this even after, so the meta database that came out, Eliza's in it with like without my knowledge or consent. And so I say it after that too. That's really interesting.
Yeah. Um, so your book was fed to the AI for training.
Yep.
Wow.
Uh-huh. It feels weird because I would have volunteered, but they can't ask me because they have to ask everybody if they ask me. Um, like, and I'm skeptical about AI, but I research the intersection of AI and creative writing specifically, and I teach it. And I teach how to use it in an intellectually rigorous way, and I teach all the environmental devastation that it can, you know, impact us with. And it's a really complicated thing, like everything else. It's messy. Um, but yeah, they can't ask individual authors because if they want billions of tokens, they're going to just have to steal it all. That's the only way to do it. And therefore, is there any ethical usage of AI? That's a great question to which nobody has an answer. However, I'm sure that there is a different way, another way to do it if we are not in capitalism. And when I say that's the only way to do it, I'm saying what corporations think, not what I think. I'm sure there are plenty of other ways to do it. But yeah, it's a really interesting quandary, particularly when I'm using an OpenAI product to make something else. I was just working on sort of a side project using OpenAI. And I was like sitting there going like, I'm plagiarizing me. But I also don't think that there's necessarily a legal leg to stand on because fair use, part of fair use is it being remixed beyond all recognizability. And I think that, you know, authors are going to lose. I still think they should fight it, but I think authors are going to lose particularly on fair use. I will also say it feels different for me than it does for people whose memoirs are in there. Um, because my fiction, yeah, you can't hide in fiction, and it's coming from me and it's coming from my soul. But there are people whose like assault memoirs are in training data, and that just feels wrong. So I do think every author has sort of a different relationship to this as well, and it's an interesting thing to ask authors who have been in those data sets, what their relationship to it is, because I haven't really heard two of the same.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you're more sanguine about it than most, so that's actually a helpful uh, perspective. So one of the questions we have from Mallory, she asks, "Your bio says you teach fiction and interactive fiction. How do those skills differ?" It kind of dovetails with this. So.
Ooh, so those skills are very similar most of the time, with some big departures. So we've got some craft elements that are going to translate no matter what. We've got setting, we've got character, we've got point of view. I was just telling ER I don't believe voice exists. I think voice is just an add up of all the other things we just talked about. So I'm going to take voice out of there. Voice doesn't exist. We have all of those things in interactive as well. We then have other different structural considerations that are also largely about when people know what and how they find it out. Um, and also how much agency a player has in those circumstances. So we could do non-linear, something like Bandersnatch on Netflix. If you've never seen it, that's usually the first thing I teach my interactive students because it is sort of directly like we can see a choice tree um, sort of resulting from it. That's one way to do interactive storytelling. Another way to do interactive storytelling is what I like to call possibility space storytelling, where you write the box that people then make decisions into, something like a tabletop RPG. So, we are still, particularly in that instance, we are still, setting is usually one of the big ones that we do in that. We all agree on a setting that has certain characteristics, whether it has magic, whether it has tech, whether it has something else, whether there's war and famine, whether there's peace and love. Like we agree on something about the setting, and then we make our infinite decisions sort of within that space. Um, so yeah, lots of things transfer and lots of things don't. I also just secretly believe though that all reading is interactive because I am projecting a hallucination into your head, and you have to construct it. So there's going to be like we just saw things that readers see in this book that I did not understand were there that are clearly there, and that's really cool. So the answer is some things transfer and some things are super different. But ultimately, all the reading is interactive, is my answer. I hope that was a comprehensive enough answer that made sense.
Mallory asked another question, and I happen to know that Mallory has a background in coding and programming. So she asks, "I've never tried to write fiction before. How would one start?" So I'm wondering if you could add another layer on as knowing that as well.
Knowing that, if you've never written fiction before but you have coded, I would actually recommend starting in interactive rather than starting standard. And a way to do that is to look at Twine, which is an amazing platform that I make all of my students do because it's free and open source. It also happens to be hella fucking trans. Because if you give a whole bunch of people a free open source nerd thing, you know who's going there first. You know who's got it. And it's largely the trans women. So the platform has become a real point of a real way of expression, a real community that is heavily, heavily centered on trans storytelling. Um, what I would then do is play a bunch of Twine games and see what they have in common and see what is deeply affecting for you. Where I would start you, particularly since you're in this crowd, is with Those We Love Alive by Porpentine. I really love that one. It's interesting in its composition because it both has a linear time and a clock. You do things in days, and depending on how many days you are in, different things happen. But it's also spatially organized, and you traverse a city and a palace. And I just think having those two things together at the same time is really neat. Pay attention to what gets you. The same is going to be true when you are reading standard fiction. Pay attention to what gets you and then try to figure out why. So an exercise then to do, if you're doing either interactive or standard fiction, starting from both of them at once, nothing says you have to do one or the other. You can just sort of start doing that, is break it down into an ingredients list. This affects me because these characters make really intense decisions about life or death. That's deeply affecting to me. Okay, try to get 5 per piece that you experience, and then write 2 pages in the style of it. And that is how you would start, because then all of a sudden you're mimicking those craft techniques, but you get to apply them to your own thoughts, your own things that you're familiar with, your own fascinations. I also can't take credit for this pedagogy. This is directly out of my grad program. Shelley Jackson does this in her class, and it's where my whole first book came from. Is writing 2 pages in the style of, in this case, it was Motorman. My book sounds nothing like Motorman, but that is what got me started. And 2 pages became 15, became 50, became 400, and there you go. So I would highly recommend doing that as an exercise. If you are a coder, start with what you know, start with games, and start with interactive fiction.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's awesome. Great advice. So I want to end with some fun because I know that you like fun and
I
games,
That's fun.
and also that you're decisive. So this is would you rather or this or that. Would you rather have roommates or live alone?
Live alone.
Would you rather attend a party or host a party?
Host a party.
Lose sleep or skip a meal?
Skip a meal.
Hang out with little kids or old people?
Little kids.
Sweating or shivering?
Oh, sweating.
See the future or change the past?
See the future.
False hope or unnecessary anxiety?
False hope.
Time machine or magic wand?
Every time. Hold on. We need to false hope every time. It is a better way to live.
Oh,
now,
100%.
what's your next question?
I'm also 100% false hope. Time machine or magic wand?
Magic wand. Easy.
Yeah, same. Dragons or unicorns?
Oh, it's got to be unicorns, but that's a hard one.
Telekinesis or telepathy?
Telekinesis.
The movie
Wouldn't it
Labyrinth.
be great? Like, I don't like. I had to lean over to get this water. Wouldn't it be great if I was just like, and the water just like, beep? Wouldn't that be great? Anyhow,
Yes.
continue.
I also think telepathy would be similar to understanding every language in the world.
I do not. I do not want to. I do not want to know what people think about me. That is their business. That is not mine. I do not want to know what people are thinking about in their private moments because everyone deserves their own interiority, which is hilarious coming from me who wrote Ultra Omniscience. But you know,
Yeah, same.
Yeah, no, I would not want that.
Um, the Jim Henson movie Labyrinth, or the Jim Henson movie The Dark Crystal.
Labyrinth. It's my favorite movie still. It is like my favorite childhood movie. It is my best friend and my movie together. We still watch it every time that we get together. We live far away from each other. Every time that we get together, the first night that we are together, we watch Labyrinth.
I love it. Two queer fantasy classics. Invisible Cloak or Invincibility Shield.
Oh, Invincibility Shield.
Um, well, we kind of already discussed this. Mind reading ability, you don't really want, or shape shifting powers.
Oh, shapeshifting. I want shapeshifting.
Yes.
But my actual power, so I was just asked this and no one had asked it me before. Um, is like if I were like Wilder and I woke up one day, like what would it be? What would the power be? And it's flight. Like my actual power is flight. I have a crazy like dreamscape that I have an incredible amount of agency over. And one of the things that I can do, unless a dream is a nightmare, is fly. I know exactly how to do it in every dream that is not a nightmare. I fly around all the time. Flight would be the thing. That is what I would do.
Wow, I love that. Uh,
Why can't I just take off right now?
I know. Um, read the book before watching the movie or TV adaptation, or vice versa.
Oh, read the book before. Because 9 times of 10, 9.99 times of 10, the book is going to be the better thing for me. And I can only think of one that the movie was better, and that is Practical Magic. The movie is better.
I think Station 11 is a better TV show than book.
I haven't seen it, but I love the Station 11 book. There's a podcast with me breaking down Station 11, the book during the pandemic.
Oh,
It's
I want to hear that.
It's called Queers at the End of the World. It's a podcast about queer apocalypse. And my friends Nat and Nino host it. They also have a live play on there that I'm a part of. So you can also experience me and a bunch of other really weird queer author people playing Dream Askew together. Um, so I'll now have to do the Station 11 TV series. I had no idea
It's
that.
so. I mean, I love the book. See, Mallory agrees.
Yeah, the
The,
book.
the book is amazing. Emily St. James Mandel, or whatever her name is, went on, like,
Mandel, I think.
yes, thank you. Literally was like, oh yeah, I actually wish I had wrote the book the way that y'all adapted the TV show. So even she
Damn.
was like, y'all did great. So
Okay.
um, only a couple more of these. Would you rather sneeze confetti or hiccup bubbles?
Oh, sneeze confetti. Because
Uh,
hiccuping is fun no matter what, like it's a sensory hail, but sneezing is a nothing thing, and then I wouldn't sneeze snot.
yeah,
Like that the problem with sneezing is that sometimes you embarrassingly sneeze a lot of snot. It would not be so embarrassing if it were confetti.
that's true. It would be fun. Uh, finally, reading one book at a time or multiple books at once.
7.
Yeah.
I have 7. Always on the go. I'm a Gemini. I'm a monster. I cannot be stopped.
Same. I'm not a Gemini, but I just read a million books at once. So this is the time when I plug the book, but I want you to plug your own audiobook
Oh,
because
I didn't even talk about the audiobook. I did the audiobook. So if you are an audiobook person, I'm particularly proud of this. I have an acting background that I thought I was never going to ever use. And so I've used my acting degree one time, and it was for this audiobook. I did 7 voices. I narrate the whole thing, including all that ultra omniscience. And it was really fun to do. I had a fucking blast. And I'm really proud of the end result. So if you are an audiobook person, please get the audiobook and that Libro FM link. One of the things I love about Libro FM is you can set a bookstore that benefits from your audiobook purchases. It's way better than doing something like Audible, which just benefits, Bezos. So do that instead and set it to Charis if you want the audiobook, and Charis will benefit from your audiobook purchase. So highly recommend that. It's also lovely to read. I did make it for that. So you can read it with your eyes, and that's just as good.
yes. So if you want to read it with your eyes and or do both, follow along with the audio and read, so, which
And I
amazing.
can tell you that we paid special attention to whisper sync even when there are links or something that I have to read out loud. So it's quite accurate.
Very important. People get very mad if they do not sync up. So well done. So you can click the link in the chat to buy the audiobook. You can click the teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy the hardback book, the paper book, the meat space book, if you will. You can also buy We Are Watching Eliza Bright. We in paperback. I have the hardback, but it's available in paperback from Charis. We would love for you to do that as well. Um, uh, do you want to plug any other stuff you got coming up? Anything else you're excited about that you want people to know about?
Um, I'm working on a thing right now for a big collection called The Joy of Elit. And that's not out for a really long time. But it is a thing that I'm working on, and I'm actually writing about With Those We Love Alive by Serpentine. And I'm doing an analysis of that and focusing on all of the amazing things about it. So yeah, watch out for that. I'll post about it on social when it's out. I'm still drafting it, but I'm that's the thing that's top of mind because I'm working on it right now. Uh,
Great. Well, thank you so much. This was so fun. I'm so happy for you, and this is a great book, and it's I think really timely. So I hope people will read it now and think about all like have fun and also think about all the moral stuff that's in it that I think is really important for us to be thinking about. So
this is really my love letters to my people. And I think that that does come across. So, particularly if you are queer or trans, it is for anyone, but particularly if you are queer or trans, this one's for you.
yes, and if you've ever been betrayed by stupid JK,
Betrayed by J.K. Rowling. This one's for you.
we'll say it here. F you, JK. We we're so glad that we can create art that refutes your narrow views about trans
Yeah.
people. So, well, A, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. You're so great, and you're so good at teaching what you do and talking about it. So I've learned so much from you. I hope that you stay safe and well, and that we'll get to do this again for a future book.
Hell yeah. Thank you, ER. And keep going on your doorstopper of an amazing novel. I can't wait to see it published. So keep going, keep going, keep going.
I will. Thank you. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.